Good afternoon, and welcome to today's program, Understanding Mergers and the Acquisition Process. This event is brought to you by Pacific Northwest Defense Coalition and Merritt Harbor Capital. First, I want to confirm that all of you joining us here today can hear okay and see the screen. If you could just type yes in the question tab, make sure that we're all online and working today. Great. Thank you so much. Please feel free to use this same question field to ask a question at any time during the program. You can type this question in the webinar dashboard and we will share it with the speaker. Please also see the handout tab for a copy of today's presentation, as well as a list of upcoming PNDC events. We're delighted to have Craig Dickinson, CEO of Merritt Harbor Capital, joining us here today. We appreciate Merritt Harbor hosting this program that was a response to many questions we received at the last PNDC member CEO dinner. As introduction, Craig Dickinson is a serial entrepreneur and investment banker. Craig has personally started or acquired 14 businesses across diverse sectors, as well as executed 19 add-on acquisitions within those companies. Craig holds a Series 24, 82, and 36 license and specializes in sell-side M&A, buy-side advisory, and capital placements. Joining Craig here today is Nick Devaney, also with Merritt Harbor Capital. I will go ahead and hand things over and we'll begin the presentation. Thanks so much.
Well, thank you, Kate. Appreciate that introduction, and thanks for the folks listening today. We'll pick up today kind of where we left off with the last webinar that Merritt Harbor Capital put together for PNDC about kind of getting prepared and some of the options when considering either taking some chips off the table or getting prepared for a full liquidity event, and that is also available on the PNDC website if you're attending this and want to kind of hit the rewind button to look at the preparation steps that we kind of walked through and recommended. But today what we're going to talk about is more kind of in process, how we run a full kind of auction process, if you will, for companies that are desiring to have a transition. And the agenda will cover kind of the process, how it works, the overview and timeline, kind of the work plan between the investment banking company and the client, and kind of look at the deliverables involved in that, as well as kind of a breakdown of who does what and what to expect from the process. And then we have a couple of tools that if folks want some deeper insights on how to get prepared, or what some of those steps might look like, that we can offer at your request to develop the information and to market the company, as well as some of the due diligence requests, which, unless you're an experienced company seller, if you will, that due diligence list can seem pretty onerous when you look at it, but certainly it's like anything else. You just have to be prepared and kind of plug away at it, and obviously the investment banking company will help you prepare that. So there's a bit of an overview of our agenda today, and I just kind of wanted to jump right in and kind of as a reminder where we left off last time. As you look to prepare and as you look to go to market through an acquirer's eyes, they're going to be concentrating on three primary things, among others, but these are really the building blocks of going out to market. Is your company growing? Does it show a track record for growth, or has the ability to scale and grow under a new acquirer's mandate for the company? Are your earnings consistent and or improving? And obviously, as you look at multiples and how valuable your company is, there is a size component. If you're $1 million company, the reliability of your revenues is probably not as strong as if you're a $100 million company. So as you look to kind of three things, whatever you can do to improve your growth rate, your earnings, and the trajectory or size of your company, that will translate into value moving forward. So a bit of a review from our last conversation, but as you get serious about thinking about transitioning, these are when some of the softer items need to come up in terms of, what do you want out of the transaction? Do you want to stay with the company for a period of time, or do you want to get out entirely? These are some of the considerations in working through with your team of investment bankers, your CPA, your tax advisor, your wealth manager. You really want to be thoughtful and considerate about that, because you want to have a good outcome, and you want to dictate as many of the terms as possible going into an M&A process and have a good understanding for what you want to do and what that looks like going forward. So then, kind of as we talked about last time, you're at the decision point perhaps that, okay, I think it's time either for me personally and my own goals and objectives, or the marketplace is sending me so many signals that, we're getting calls every week from acquirers, and we understand we're in a low interest environment and debt is a portion of every deal. So M&A multiples are juiced, if you will, by the use of debt in today's market. And then you have to come to a decision as to what you want to do. A lot of folks will choose to do nothing. Other folks will kind of figure out their plan as they go. And then I guess there's a third bucket of folks that are very intentional about how they want to orchestrate their exit and the goals that they have. And again, we help advise along those lines as to what the best course is. So the self-serving part about this is, what should you do next if you're seriously thinking about a transition, is to hire an investment banker or a business broker. And kind of rough rule of thumb, it doesn't apply to every business, but the rough rule of thumb is, if you're under 10 million in revenues, you should probably first have a conversation with a business broker and see if that's appropriate for your business. If you have some secret sauce or technology or something that a strategic acquirer would understand, or a financial backer, a private equity company, or someone like that would be able to leverage quickly, despite the fact that you might be early, 5, 10, 15 million in revenues, then you should probably elevate that to an investment banker. And certainly over 20 million, you're going to want to get into a strategic and financial broad auction with an investment banking firm. So, that's kind of in the decision tree. Get educated, talk to a few folks, and make sure that the investment banking team, is aligned with your goals and interests, and is able to bring you to market in a way that honors your legacy. Jumping into what it looks like, what the process looks like, typically in today's market, with the availability of data, the availability of a great many, acquirers out there, more and more every day. There's a lot of capital chasing deals right now. We basically, will embark on a rigorous process with the company, with your management team, and what we'll do is we'll work through a 6-stage process. So the first stage is, grabbing materials and assembling materials and figuring out what makes the company different than its competitors, how it compares to its competitors, what's your secret sauce, what your leadership team looks like, all the components that make you, valuable in the marketplace to not only your customers, but also to potential acquirers. This is the kind of what and how of what you do, and getting a knowledge of that and being able to put that together. We then go out, and using our reach and our data resources, we then start to assemble, with your help, kind of a list of likely or most likely acquirers, people that you know in the industry, people that have been acquisitive before, and then we augment that with our own considerable network and data resources to say, here are the other players in your market or around your market that may want to make an acquisition in the space. So we kind of assemble those resources and send them back to you, and certainly, you have total control if one of your competitors is on that list, and you say, hey, I wouldn't sell to that guy if he was the last company on earth, right? We kind of cross that out, and we make sure that we only go out to the folks that kind of make sense and that you want us to go out to, that maybe match your culture, your goals, your objectives, etc. So then once we put all of that together, you may have heard companies refer to a book or a confidential information memorandum, or a CIM. We put that book together. We put marketing materials together. We go out on a no-names basis to make sure folks are interested in the deal before we share any of your information. And certainly before we do that, we make likely acquirers sign an NDA, and we're particularly careful, and we work in concert with you as to what we release and when we release when it comes to close competitors as well. So the deal marketing stage comes next, where we either do it in an auction sense, to where we go out to a large number of acquirers that fit, or if your temperament and you're in a niche business where there are fewer folks that may have a direct interest in your company, we might do it in a quiet way. So it really depends on what you'd like to do, and certainly we have some recommendations depending upon your business. Once we go out to the marketplace, now we start kind of fielding indications of interest or letters of intent, depending upon how the process is run and how we agree to running it. Indication of interest in a broad auction sense really helps us whittle down the field and gets a range of prices and terms and other considerations for a deal. And then an LOI is usually an additional step to where now we're serious. We've honed down from 200 or 300 companies down to 20, and now we will look to receive LOIs from, let's say, 5 of them that are serious contenders that meet the criteria, whether it be price, terms, or any combo of the above. And then certainly the next stage after putting together the LOI is, the acquirer will want to know that we're not quite married yet, but we're dating exclusively. So they'll want the opportunity to conduct due diligence and make sure that everything that we talked about in our materials and in our deal marketing is in fact true, and they get some more context around that to make sure that they understand fully what they're buying. And then we go into final negotiations around an asset purchase agreement or a stock purchase agreement, where obviously legal will be a heavy component of that. And making sure that we have the right agreements, representations and warranties of what exactly they're buying and what you're representing that they're buying. And then we get to the part that everybody loves, which is the closing. And that's when the dollars change hands. And in today's market, they can be any number of options. We have a piece here called 30 Ways to Leave Your Company, which talks about some of the various options that are available. Most sellers kind of underestimate how many options. It's, transfer to my kids, transfer to management or key employees, sell to my nearest competitor, or, then enter into selling into a strategic or a financial buyer. Well, within those subsets, there's lots of variations and lots of options. And part of our job throughout this entire process as investment bankers is to really bring those options to light so that you're not only armed with qualitative data but also quantitative data about what that process should look like, as well as what the acquirer ultimately should look like. Getting a little bit more granular for those that appreciate that, in this setting, this really outlines some of the deliverables and what we're working on together within those 6 steps, really to just kind of outline it a bit further, and a couple of the milestones that are involved. I will say one of the things in the process, we will have conference calls or what's called management meetings, and depending upon your company and your size and how much exposure you want to give a potential new acquirer to your successive management team, the people that might be sticking around for a longer period, we certainly coach companies, owners, and management teams on how to present, and we're right there with you. And if there's a sticky question that comes up, we obviously jump in the middle of that. But certainly, management meetings are a part of this, and one of the considerations, which probably could be its own webinar, is how confidential do we keep this process, and at what point is it appropriate to bring in some of our management team members. But certainly these are kind of some of the main points as we go through each of the processes. Expressed a different way, and I'm sure some folks are wanting to know what that looks like. These are those same 6 steps outlined with a bit of a timeline. So I think in most companies in the 10 million and up mark, you're looking at anywhere from 6 months once you're in process to maybe a year, depending upon the complexities, with an average deal time of approximately 200 days to get the company to a closing. Now, certainly some of that in the first couple of stages is getting prepared and getting ready, and a smart CEO or entrepreneur will look down the road a bit and start as early as possible, and we've got some tools to help you get more prepared. This is a process, not an event, so you want to do it with as little disruption to the company as possible and kind of chip away at it. But once we go in process, it's all about kind of getting it done and getting to market with some deal momentum and excitement around your offering. And you see, really, we do the prep work in the first month or two. We go to market. We're pretty busy during that time, having conversations on your behalf and doing some early pitching of the opportunity. And then the other part of it is, and I always want to speak to preparedness, is we don't want due diligence to be a fire drill and all of a sudden, we've got to have this giant list of 1,000 things that an acquirer is going to want to see. Even though we have due diligence as its separate stage, we will have prepared together well in advance for due diligence and have populated all the due diligence, general due diligence information beforehand, because ultimately you've got a company to run. And the worst thing that can happen is, you remember that growth rate and that earnings, and we're increasing our size and adding new contracts and all of those things. We don't want those things to go backwards while we're in process, because it is fairly distracting. And as a investment banker, it's kind of our job to shield you from most of that distraction, and the first of which is by getting prepared. That can shield us, pretty well from the fire drill that I referenced earlier. So in terms of, what does this look like, expressed a little bit differently, because again, our topic today is more about the process and, getting owners' minds wrapped around what my commitment is going to be to this process. Early on we talk about valuation, we talk about expectations, we talk about likely outcomes. We spend the time with owners because a lot of our clients are founders or entrepreneurs or first or second generation owners of companies. And a lot of that really means, if we're not a corporate kind of serial buyer and seller, that there's several lifestyle considerations, and oftentimes we see a lot of tech companies or other companies where their owners are not traditionally selling at the, gee, I want to retire, or I'm 60-something and I want to retire. There's considerations about what life looks like and what you're going to do after that. So we spend a lot of time up front kind of working on those issues with you. But then once we get into it, really your staff and our staff are kind of hand in hand, along with your other service providers like your CPA, your attorney, and your wealth manager. We have those conversations to say, okay, here's what we're thinking, here's what we need to do, and here's the work we need to do together. So this kind of gives you a breakdown. If you're kind of thinking about it and saying, okay, in the materials development section in that first phase, what's the workload going to be like on me and my people? We try to give a little bit of a breakdown of that. And then obviously in the outbound marketing, you've kind of done the work of helping us get to know your company as well as you do theoretically, right? We want to be as knowledgeable as possible. and then we go to town and we're doing most of the work in this outbound marketing. And then a good chunk of the work is being done in terms of fielding offers, making sure that they're qualified, making sure that they're bona fide indications of interest, for example, or that these acquirers have a likelihood of closing and they're not just wasting your time or kicking your tires or trying to get competitive information out of you. Then we start to see, the buyers are starting to want to schedule meetings and learn more about the opportunity. And then, of course, if we have management meetings, your time and some key members of your staff in terms of sharing more about the company and the opportunity, there's some time commitment there as well. The latter stages, in terms of final negotiations, picking your partner. Again, our philosophy at Merritt Harbor Capital is to give you lots of options and alternatives to choose from. So our default modus operandi, if you will, is to run broad auctions. So you have several acquirers to choose from. And again, so that you're making a choice on who to partner with, whether you sell all of the company, a portion of the company, or whether you kind of stick around for a second bite of the apple. That'll be an important qualitative discussion. So our goal is to get those multiple acquirers or bidders, if you will, all up and around the same range of value if we can, and then we start really focusing on terms and conditions and fit and culture and, wow, do I get along with these folks, and could I see being on the board or a partner for the next 3 to 5 years? So that's part of those kind of negotiations, and in the negotiations we will, you and Merritt Harbor will have some assessments of, kind of the character of the folks across the table. And then in the due diligence, it goes both ways, right? They will understand everything about our company from that process, at least from a paper standpoint. And then certainly they might, interview a few key clients and talk to a couple of staff members, depending upon, the level of exposure we give the acquirer. But they're going to want as much information as possible to understand what they're buying. And you can see how, counsel starts to get involved and the attorneys start preparing documents and understanding, what is the legal due diligence involved, as well as their CPAs will come in and make sure that the financial representations and the books are in good order. And then certainly, you kind of see the wheel where everybody is pushing towards close, and if we've got a good deal, we really want to bring it to close, because certainly you may have heard the old adage that time kills all deals, and certainly, if it takes us a long time to get through due diligence and we can't answer the questions, pretty quickly, that gives an indication of how well the company's run and gives everyone confidence to go into the closing. So those are kind of the 6 stages broken down. I hope that's not too much getting into the weeds, but again, as you think about your staff and as you think about this, I often, tell folks, some of us had that extra class or that extra part-time job to get out of college or, to get out of high school. You almost have to think of this process as, it's kind of a part-time job. It's a lot of work. Again, we and fellow service providers, CPA, attorney, etc., want to take some of that burden, but ultimately the company, has some responsibilities during that process as well. So we thought we'd kind of share it in some level of granularity here. And this timetable, depending upon the complexity of the company and how well you have some of these things baked into your everyday business, the time frame can obviously go up or down depending upon how prepared we are. So, lastly, this was a client that we just brought to market. This is kind of another way of expressing this from a time frame standpoint, and how many days it takes us to kind of get the information together, develop marketing materials, go out to market, consider the offers that are on the table, and how much due diligence. These can be as quick as 30 days to as long as 90 to 100 days for due diligence, and then obviously we want to be marching down the path. So this one in particular took 169 days, a little over 5.5 months to get complete. So certainly the level of commitment on our side and your side is pretty dramatic in the process, not to be underestimated. But by the same token, if we run it well, it tends to go very smoothly. and we anticipate any issues by getting to know your company really, really well so that we can hit those off at the pass in the beginning. And I think as Kate mentioned, my background is in manufacturing, serial entrepreneur. So at Merritt Harbor Capital, in particular, we're very process-oriented, and we find that really helps our clients because in a lot of ways that's how they think typically as well in and around process, whether it's software development to metal fabrication or plastic injection molding. The fit seems to be pretty well if we run a process that way. So with that, I think our goals for this conversation were to kind of outline the process, but leave plenty of time for Q&A or other questions that people might have relative to the process or how it might affect their business or their people going forward. So we wanted to make sure that we did that.
Great, thank you so much. We do have some audience questions here. I'll start off with, is a valuation truly what my company is worth? So a little bit about the valuation process.
Yeah, absolutely. So, there are several components to evaluation. If you're thinking about going to market, it's smart to get a benchmark. It's smart to understand where you are and see how that aligns with your goals. Mass Mutual did a study of business owners about 3.5 years ago, and the average business owner overestimated the value of his company or her company by 59%. So now imagine if in your mind you think your company's worth $20 million and it's not, and you're going to your financial advisor and you're thinking about turning your illiquid company, which may or may not represent 60 to 80% of your net worth, and you're like, okay, I think it's worth 20 million when it's really only worth a little under 10. Your retirement planning is going to be off by quite a bit. So if you're smart, I would suggest you go to your CPA, get a traditional valuation. If you're going to make a transfer for tax purposes to successors or kids in the business, you're definitely going to want to do that for tax planning purposes. And the one piece that I would, encourage you to circle in on is also get with an investment banker, because the market, even though we're dealing with historical data of past transactions, and your CPA will be able to give you some of that data as well, really the marketplace, especially in today's seller market, can change that number from a 10 million to a 14 million or a 15 million based on what's going on in that market and what sector you play in. And it tends to move not as predictably as you would think. So getting that market-based approach, and what we do is we put together a full pitch deck that says, hey, here's all the transactions in the space, here's companies that look like you, here's what the industry average is and how you perform against the average. And really we kind of build a thesis for not only what you are worth, but what you could be worth if there were some subtle changes in the business, if we discovered that there might have been a couple gaps in the plan, right? I'll give you an example there, and I know this is a long answer to a short question, but if we look at the leadership team and we've had steady growth in the business, but we really don't have a VP of sales, it may be worth it to you to plug that gap in the leadership team in terms of future value, to then go to market after you've got somebody in and stabilized in that position. So getting a valuation would be a great step to benchmark, know where you stand, how that pings against your goals and objectives for the company, and then certainly how it relates to the market. Would highly recommend it.
Great. And a question along that same line, actually several questions cover this. When should I call a business broker if I'm 3 to 5 years out from a sale, and what should I expect at that benchmark prior to selling?
Great question. And again, this may sound a little self-serving, but the earlier the better, because there's two elements there, right? So one is getting an understanding of what you're worth today. The second is And we find a lot of companies, they might have this year's budget, but they don't necessarily pro forma 5 years out because that seems a little too crystal ballish. And many companies do. Obviously, there's discipline around that in your process. But what we want to make the first assessment is, okay, if today you're worth this, how do you get to being worth maybe what you really want? And we've had people say, oh, really? I'm worth that? Let's go out tomorrow, right? I want to get rid of the risk. I want to get rid of the liability. So having somebody come in, and again, investment bankers aren't going to charge you, a whole lot of dollars, or business brokers aren't going to charge you dollars to kind of gauge and start engaging in a process of value enhancement with you. We do that in particular. We're a very patient investment bank. It's not just all about transact. It's about how can we help you reach your goals. And if you're not where you want to be, certainly with our experience and knowing what makes a company valuable, we can certainly help you get there. One tool, and it's a no-brainer. It's pretty easy. It takes you about 15 minutes. On the bottom of our website, there's a little tool called Core Value, and it's a 15-minute survey. Very high-level questions. You're not going to go brain dead filling it out, but by the same token, that's not the complete program. But what it'll do is it'll give you a quick report out based on your industry, your revenue, and your earnings, how other companies in your industry or your sector, like if you're in manufacturing, how your business compares and what value gaps might exist based on how you answer those questions, so that you'll get a report out that says, if I improve this area of the business, it could be worth an extra $1 million. So I'd encourage anyone that's attending this webinar, if you want to go to the bottom of our website, merrittharborcapital.com, there's a little survey there, and it'll tell you that, what is the value gap between where you sit now compared to your peers, of what you could be worth if you did some value enhancement work. And our bank, we'd love to work with you on that, whether it takes 5 years, 2 years, 6 months. You might be where you are and ready to sell and ready to go, or you might, from taking that survey or talking to a banker, say, I think I got 6 or 12 months worth of work to do working on the business versus in the business, perhaps, to increase the value.
And following up on that, we have a question. How does an investment banker get paid versus a broker?
It's all over the map. So again, a business broker, the buyer is typically, and if we were to break that 10 million versus 10 million below and 10 million up, a business broker, I would say typically, you're looking for a buyer. You're not finding investment groups coming in and buying companies on the smaller side. So they'll charge typically a percentage success fee or possibly a retainer to get the company ready and go out to market. And their marketing efforts are, they can be fairly robust, but traditionally there's kind of a stated price for your business, especially if you're on the Main Street small side of things, the couple $1 million. They'll post the price out and the rationale for the price, and then folks will be like, okay, I'll go to the website and take a look. Whereas on the investment banking side, same kind of deal, retainer plus success fee, but our marketing efforts are more of, we kind of look at the company as the bride, and we let acquirers make offers based on, what we put out in the marketplace and the strength of the company. So it's a little bit more of a robust marketing process. We're dealing typically with, institutional, financial, or strategic buyers versus, high net worth or somebody looking to purchase a company. And typically, if you're, in the 10 million, maybe 20 million and up, your company might be a platform investment for those folks versus a add-on investment for those folks. So there's a little bit more complexity in how we market those companies and how we represent those companies. But to answer your question, it's a retainer to get us out into the marketplace, and then a success fee when the company closes.
Great, thank you. Another question, at what stage did you discuss the amount of money a seller will walk away with, especially since it can depend on the deal?
Yeah, so part of that auction mindset, if you will, is to have several offers, and Certainly early in the process, and part of the work that we do is collaborating deeply with your CPA, and you will have some goals and objectives for the transaction, and at the end of the day, it's net cash after close is a lot of time the most important number, and understanding the tax ramifications of a transaction are huge. So we really want to tackle that early. We'll give you kind of a range of, based on the information available in the marketplace as to what other similar companies like yours have traded for. We'll do all sorts of kind of valuation methods to come up with that number. But we want to run that number by your CPA, and certainly if we have 24 or 36 months to plan for an exit, there are some things that your CPA and your investment banker will recommend most likely that you do to plan for that event. So there are also some things in negotiations when we have 4 or 5 people at the table. There are some interesting things in the tax code that allow us to provide a tax-advantaged structure to a deal versus just rely on the highest dollar and then just pay Uncle Sam whatever he's due. There's some mitigating strategies there that with the proper time and planning we can we can work on those together, and also allow you to look at the net after close proceeds, both short term and long term on a sale, because ultimately that's other than cultural fit and some of those other qualitative measures, you want to be able to kind of look at those numbers on an after-tax basis. We work with the CPA to do that.
Great. And can we have you comment on how do you choose an asset versus an entity sale?
Yeah, good question. And actually to dovetail on Craig's answer, that's another piece that we like to flesh out early as we work through scenarios. So real life scenario, we had a company that was a C corporation that when we did their after-tax cash outlay, they were looking at a transaction that was far outside of market for what they were looking for. So what we did was we changed our strategy before going to market and said, we let everybody know that we needed to have a stock transaction for tax purposes, and we really did not hide that fact. So what happened was, valuations came in a little bit lower, quote unquote, to what the market peg would have given for valuation, but the after-tax dollars and the ramification of a stock transaction netted out more capital and liquidity at the end. So it gets a little more complex than that. We start talking about different elections. You can structure an asset sale with various IRS elections, depending on the structure of the deal, that have to do with if you essentially want to reinvest in your own company. If you're kind of quote-unquote platform worthy, you may have a purchase price that also considers you what they call rolling back a percentage of your proceeds back into the company. That too will have an effect on how we structure the asset versus stock, or an asset with a stock election, etc. So those again are things that we flush out various scenarios at the beginning of the process, so that if there's any big hurdles that we need to overcome, we do that early.
And the fundamentals there, Kate, obviously if someone's buying the stock of your company, they're buying all the liabilities and all the past history of the company. So traditionally, a lot of acquirers in the lower middle market have stayed away from that. We just want to buy the assets and kind of move on. But since it is somewhat of a seller's market, we're seeing more and more stock transactions, if they're comfortable with the risk and the disclosures and the like, happening, which tend to save sellers some tax dollars. So again, the marketplace has a little bit of a pendulum effect sometimes, depending upon whether it's a seller's market or a buyer's market.
One thing to keep in note, not to belabor the question, but when we say asset sale, and 9 times out of 10 people understand what that is, but every once in a while we'll run into the entrepreneur who says, well, my assets are worth X, why would I only sell for that? Asset really has to do with the way that the deal gets structured. So oftentimes, again, depending on size, you're going to be valued on your multiple of EBITDA, and it's the structure of the deal that is called an asset sale, and that has to do with tax ramifications. So it's not purely selling your assets itself.
Great. Are there any special considerations for companies that are in the defense space that may not be able to be sold to a non-U.S. company?
Yeah. Yes.
How much time do we have?
Yeah, it's special considerations. There are global acquirers in the space, and we kind of have to answer that one situationally. I don't want to dodge the question, but it really depends on what the company does as to who their acquirer could be. So that we'd probably want to tackle that one on a case-by-case basis. I think from a special consideration standpoint, if I understood the question, the first part of the question, a lot of defense contractors and companies that support defense or aerospace or others, you've really only got a handful of customers. But certainly the people that are acquirers in that space understand the pros and cons of only having, either the government or different branches of the government or Defense Department or what have you. That's they get that. You're not necessarily going to be penalized for just having a customer concentration. So from that standpoint, special considerations. And certainly, contract life, contract value, some of those things, come into the valuation in terms of where you are in that cycle and process. So I hope that answers that question. But certainly, if folks want to know specifically where they fit and what restrictions might be placed on the sale, we'd love to talk to them about that on a case-by-case basis.
Great. And what is the structure in a deal? What are the things that are typically included? Let me see if I'm understanding this correctly. Earnouts, seller notes, does the owner need to stick around, etc.?
Yeah, all of those are potential considerations in a deal. The cleanest deal is one where it's 100% sale of the entity and it's an all-cash offer and, very little representations and warranties, on behalf of the seller. But again, that's a very small sliver of the deals that are done. I will say, again, being a bit of a seller's market, we're not seeing as much structure and or terms that include, earnouts and sticking around for an extended period of time. But they're a part of a good many deals. Certainly there are things that, what's the most valuable business is one that doesn't depend on you. So the degree to which your management team, can execute on a growth plan and utilize capital that an acquirer puts into the company and gets a great return on it. Some of those things are mitigated by your preparation work and your ability to have the company run without you. An earnout, in our eyes, we like to look at that just in a generic term as kind of being the gravy. And we counsel folks and say, hey, look, here's what the range of values might be. If you want the upper register of values, you may have to take some of it on contingent payments or an earnout per se. Or if your history of earnings is, spotty up and down, an acquirer might want to hedge their bet there. But structure really, comes into play in our mind of, is kind of an added sweetener or the difference between the third place potential acquirer and the first place acquirer is that gravy or that, additional amount. If your retirement fund is dependent upon an earnout, then, we need to level set our expectations to make sure that we've got reasonable expectations in the market as far as structure is concerned.
Great. Thank you so much. We really appreciate you joining us. This is very valuable information. Any last comments or things that you hope everybody walks away from today's program with?
We're here to help. We're here to consult. I think from Merritt Harbor Capital's perspective, and again, being serial entrepreneurs as well as investment bankers, and your stockbroker will say the same thing. Don't try and time the market. I know we've had some pent-up demand, coming out of a deep and long recession. Our values may have gone backwards. And many of us, our businesses may be experiencing some great traction and some great heyday, but the influence of low interest rates, lots of available capital, high multiples paid for companies, tech companies getting out earlier and earlier in their life cycle, and folks, that are willing to step up to the table and buy companies. We would make an argument that the next couple of years are going to be a great time, to sell your business. And, we always hedge our bets that have we hit the highest of the high. But again, start early. Don't try to grab every last dollar, but let's do the preparation work together that'll get a great outcome for you and your family and your employees.
Great. Thank you so much. I will remind everybody on the program today that we will send you a recording of this webinar so that you can share it. We'll also include a link to the previous webinar that has some good foundational information. Craig, Nick, thank you so much. We really appreciate you sharing your expertise today and your long-term support and membership in PNDC. I know you've been very helpful to many of our members, and I encourage people here on the program today to reach out and get your assistance as they're looking at different opportunities. I will remind everybody we have several upcoming PNDC events. On July 11th, we have a networking event at Out of the Box Manufacturing in Renton, Washington. We'll also have a networking event in Wilsonville, Oregon at FLIR Systems on July 13th. Our annual Shooting Range Day event and networking lunch will be July 27th, and our VIP Summer Bash will be August 12th here in Wilsonville, Oregon. Thank you again to our speakers and to everyone who joined us here today. That concludes today's webinar.